The most widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path. A path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Tonight's episode is Planting Seeds of the Divine.
Hello, everyone. I might share briefly because we have a show tonight in which we'll be talking some about tradition. We have a little family tradition, and that is that when we sit down to eat, we say thankful. And thankful for us is going around the table and telling each other what we're thankful for. And with my kids, sometimes I kind of enforce this a little bit. They, for some reasons, have some challenges coming up with thankful, and we'll sometimes do several rounds of it. Tonight, I shared that I was thankful for this show and the people that I get to meet. And this is true perhaps tonight more than ever, because I've been looking forward to tonight's interview with Yiscah. Almost forgot her last name, Yiscah Smith, who is from Israel. And we had to wait quite a while because it was a trip here to the US so that we could do the show live on a Tuesday night without the time zone change. And here we are. And I'm just going to bring Yiscah right into the studio and get this show on the road after this long wait. Welcome, Yiscah.
Hi, shalom, everyone. Hi.
Well, and we were just talking about a story that I'd heard about heaven and hell, and I shared it with Yiscah, and guess what? She's like, well, yes, of course, that's from the Jewish tradition. And I didn't acknowledge it's probably where I got it, because I was on the City of David archaeological expedition in 1981 in conjunction with Hebrew University. Who knows where I heard this story from, but it probably is a Jewish traditional story about heaven and hell. And so we're going to get to know whether that's true or not, because Yiscah has a story to tell. Let's start with your creation story. Who were your parents? Where were you born? What was it like growing up in the environment that you were introduced into as you began your long exploratory journey to where you are today?
Oh, okay, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So I was born in 1951. I'm 74 years old now, thank God, in good health. May it continue. I was born on Long Island, a town called Patchogue, Long Island, to two amazing, wonderful parents. I'm the oldest of three. There are three of us. And we grew up knowing we were Jewish. However, it was not a mainstay. It was not something that really defined much of the home life. We did keep some of the tradition of the major holidays, the high holidays, Passover, Hanukkah, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. However, equally so, my parents brought us up with values that are rooted very much in the Jewish tradition, which I did not learn till much later. As we were brought up cultivating kindness, respect, giving people the benefit of the doubt, not uttering slanderous gossip talk about people. This is how we were brought up until my mom passed away almost 11 years ago. My parents were married almost 66 years, and they modeled for us what it is to be in a loving, kind, respectful relationship. However, that being said, and I will always honor them and be grateful for having such a beautiful upbringing, I never heard the word soul or spirituality. I mean, if I did, I don't recall. It was just not spoken about, that we have another dimension of living, which is our relationship with the divine. with God, in whose image we're all created. So that led me to begin an exploration, a search. And it brought me to Israel for the first time in 1971 on my 20th birthday while I was in college. I was in between sophomore and junior years in college. And I felt this affinity, like the land was just calling to me. And I began to question, or began to realize, I know very little about my own tradition. The history and the Bible, the prophets, the 5 books of Moses, modern Zionism, all of this was a mystery to me. So when I left Israel and I came back to university to finish my bachelor's program, I started as much as I could at the George Washington University in DC. I started to take a lot of electives that had to do with comparative religion and Hebrew, modern day Israel, so on and so forth. So that's how I began my search for a deeper experience of what I became aware of as my soul, that piece of the divine that resides within each of us. That's part one.
Well, and so when we talked about this story earlier, it was, the land literally speaking to you, right? I don't know if I'm rushing ahead a little bit in the story, or, I mean, was it already happening then, or was that at a subsequent revisit?
No, at the very first visit. And I'll tell
Yeah.
you what happened at that time in 1971. Israel, the airport, maybe even also the other airports, I forget, but I do remember there were no jetways yet. So we landed on, we had to deplane down steps onto the tarmac, and then there was a bus that would bring everyone to the terminal. And I remember watching people look like regular people were getting down on their knees on the oily, greasy tarmac with tears, mumbling words, and kissing it. And I said, these people are onto something that I know nothing about. So right from the get-go, even before I went to passport control in the terminal, I already felt there's something here, something, and I did learn much later that there is a tradition that we do kiss the ground when we come back to Israel, to our home, and
Wow.
out of gratitude to our Creator. And
So,
that brought
go ahead.
That brought me, while I was in Israel that summer, to the Western Wall. And people were telling me this is the remnant of the temple, the first temple, the second temple that was destroyed, the second one by the Romans, by the Roman Empire. I didn't know what they were referring to. The temple. I grew up in Temple Bethel on Long Island. Now I'm told there's the temple. Everything was so foreign to me, and yet I just was so curious. So I went up to the wall. Some people call it the Wailing Wall. In Hebrew, it's really the Western Wall, which is the remnant of a surrounding wall around the temple. And this is all we have today from those times, from that era. And I remember going up to the wall. Now, as I mentioned, I didn't grow up with a lot of tradition in the synagogue with the prayer service. It was more foreign to me than familiar. So I didn't know what to do. So I look and everyone's either kissing the wall or talking to the wall, crying, smiling, moving their arms. So I figured I'll kiss the wall too. Who knows what? I didn't know what to do. And I mustered up a few prayers. And I heard this voice say, "Welcome home." And I kid you not, I'm not exaggerating. It was a voice deep, deep inside, which later I realized, I came to learn, really was what we call the still small voice, which is how our soul speaks to us. And I believed it. At first, I pushed back on it. Home? New York is my home. And then I thought about it as the voice kept repeating herself. I do feel, for some odd reason, and I'll only quote Carl Jung here, not the biggest Jewish rabbi scholar, Carl Jung, but he said that intuitiveness, and this was an intuitive voice, is when you know for sure you have absolute clarity without any empirical evidence. And that was a moment that my intuitive voice spoke to me.
Wow. Well, I can share a little story. Right before the show, you were asking me a little bit about the Baha'i faith, because I was a Christian minister and I'm now a Baha'i, and we hadn't really talked about that. But what I was just reminded when you talked about these people kissing the ground is that when Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, he was exiled to Akka from the Ottoman Empire, sequentially through Baghdad, Adrianople, Constantinople, and finally he arrived on the shore of Israel. And when he did, there's a story, and it's documented, he knelt down and kissed the ground. And later he stood on Mount Carmel, and he gave this oracle or message. It's called a tablet. You might say an epistle, a prophetic utterance. Call out to Zion, O Carmel.
Wow.
Hasten to circumambulate, right? Literally calling out for Zion to reestablish itself. This was in like 1880, 1890.
Yeah, during the Ottoman Empire.
Right. And right there, of course, is Elijah's cave. There's like an upper and a lower cave. And I remember when I was there in 81 going to that, I think it's the upper cave. And there was a sign out there about Eretz Israel. And I remember standing there. I have a picture of this somewhere, and reading that sign and being deeply moved. Now, I don't think I have any Jewish blood. It's possible that there's a little bit of Israelitish blood there, because there were 10 lost tribes, and who knows over his, whatever. But so I didn't have quite the experience, but there was still something magical. I had a similar experience in South Africa, actually, just the power of the primordial landscape. And I remember waking up early in the morning, all energized, and thinking about the Southern Cross in the sky, and expecting to see dinosaurs coming over the horizon there. It was so primordial. So I really appreciate you sharing that deeply moving experience. What else? So those were really turning points in your life. Anything else you want to share about that first phase before we go to a quick commercial break and then come back and talk about what next?
Well, what so inspired me and energized me is I was in the midst of so many different ways that all the Israelis were expressing their Judaism. We're coming from New York. Either you were ultra-Orthodox, if you were really religious, and then there was everybody else. And here, there was such a diverse expression of Judaism. It really it pulled on me. It captured my heart and soul. Yeah. So
people don't normally think of that aspect of Israel, the modern nation, diversity. But you've used that there was a diverse set of expressions of worship and tradition.
And just expression, because what happened from 1948 through today, there's been this ongoing ingathering of all Jewish people from all over the world. Because after the destruction of both the first and then the second temples, the Jews were forced out and spread all over the world. And now many are coming back. So they're bringing with them 2,000 years worth of different traditions. There's the Jews that stayed in the Mideast, in the Arab lands, Jews from what we call the Sephardic Jews from Spain and Morocco and Italy, Jews from Russia and the UK, also North America. Everyone's bringing all these different traditions of how to be Jewish. And then there's the modern Israeli version. Young people in the army, like my grandchildren, going in, going out. So there's this mixture. There's this coming together of different, from the return from the exile back home, and yet bringing with that very diverse experiences.
Well, there's this one imagery of being sifted like wheat, and I think it's used in a variety of ways, some of them rather harrowing and negative, but there's one instance, if I recall, that I will sift you like wheat, but not one grain will fall to the ground. Are you familiar with that quote from the I'll have to look it up maybe in the break here. But we're going to go to a quick commercial break, which is about you and your work. When we come back, we will talk about your decision to reside permanently in Israel. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Yiscah Smith.
Yiscah Smith is a thought leader, spiritual activist, and agent of change who helps people hear and connect with their inner voice, and the divine spark within her work brings clarity, grounding, and authenticity to anyone seeking a more meaningful spiritual life. With a gentle and honest approach, she encourages others to walk their path with integrity, compassion, and a deep sense of purpose. Her book, Planting Seeds of the Divine, offers a practical way to bring that inner work into everyday life. Drawing on reflections from the weekly Torah portions, the book highlights essential qualities, emotional and spiritual traits that help us grow from within. Each chapter includes a simple guided practice, making ancient teachings accessible, personal, and relevant for today's spiritual seeker. Planting Seeds of the Divine is an invitation to cultivate a more mindful, heartfelt relationship with yourself and with the divine presence that lives within you and with the world around you. Available at Amazon.
Beautiful. And tell us a little bit about that. Tell us a little bit
I'm
about
sorry?
that book, Planting Seeds.
Oh,
Tell us a little bit about that book, Planting Seeds of the Divine.
So this is a book, and again, that inner voice, it appeared to me as a calling. I felt deep inside that I needed to share the accumulation of 50 years of scholarship, of inquiry, of accepting, pushing back, rejecting, celebrating different texts, different ideas from the first 5 books of the Bible, from Genesis through Deuteronomy, which we read in the Jewish tradition every Sabbath, a portion of the 5 books. And each year, after the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur holidays, we have Sukkot, and then we finish the yearly cycle and begin anew again. And there are many, I can't even imagine, hundreds of books that provide commentaries over the millennia, exploring each Torah portion and its different meanings. I felt, though, I wanted to contribute something not only to the Jewish world, but following Isaiah's mandate for the Jewish people to really be a light to the nations by extracting from each of the Torah portions a spiritual sensitivity, a way of planting a seed, metaphorically, in our inner garden of spiritual awareness. So what I've done is I provided the reader with 47 different seeds, like a beginning packet of seeds to plant your garden. For example, cultivating, having more trust in oneself, self-confidence, the spiritual understanding of bringing guests into your home, what it means to sense the divine among us, cultivating the need to connect with other human beings and beyond human beings, the rest of God's world. So this way, what I do is I bring in commentators, both the medieval and the more contemporary mystical ones in the past several centuries, and then my own understanding that all support this. So it's more of an exploration of what I would say, how to show up in the world with our higher selves, with our godly selves, with our better selves. And yeah.
So I want to take a little step back and understand the sort of genesis of this book more fully. So we talked earlier just about the overall arc of your journey. And I apologize for jumping right into the book because we didn't cover this, and now I'm fuzzy on the details. But what was it? What was it when you decided to move to Israel? Because you came back, and then you decided to move there. So tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll get back into that book.
Okay. So in 1973, I graduated college with my bachelor's degree. I already knew that in one form or another, I really wanted to be an educator. I just knew that for years. However, I wanted to take a year off before I went to graduate school, well, to first decide what specialty within education I wanted to pursue a master's degree in. And I wanted to spend more time in Israel. So I was there in 71. Now I'm going back in 1973. And I really didn't know when I'd leave. I knew I had to leave eventually to apply to grad school and pursue my master's, but it was an open-ended ticket. And I arrived to Israel, and then it's the high holiday season. And of course, no one could imagine what happened on Yom Kippur. I was there for what I say now, my first war in Israel. Unfortunately, not the last, but it was my first. And I remember it was really, of course, like it was alarming. It was so traumatic. I was in my 20s, and here the country's being bombed and invaded. Like, it was just really frightening. Over 2,000 Israelis died within 10, 12 days.
And it was not just, one enemy. There was a coalition of nations attacking.
Yes. What happened was, this was the time. This was many years ago. The technology just afforded us basic analog phones, and we wanted to call all the volunteers on the kibbutz that I worked on, wanted to call our families. Finally, 3 days into the war, I was able finally to call my parents. And of course, as soon as my mother heard my voice, she was hysterical. And her words were, "I expect you to get on the next plane back to New York, back home immediately." So I said to her, "Well, Mom, first of all, the airport's closed because there's a war." And then the words came out of my mouth. I did not think of it. I didn't plan it. I didn't contrive it. I did say, and I remember this, "But Mom, I am home." And she said, "No, you're not. You're in Israel. I want you to come home." I said, "Well, I will come back to New York. I'll come back to you, and we'll discuss it." And that's when I knew, right then and there, I am home, and someday I want to raise my family there. Get married and raise my family in Israel. It was so clear to me, because the survival of Israel was an existential crisis, and I was part of supporting that in whatever I could have done as a volunteer on the kibbutz, which was very important because all the young people went right into the army, so the kibbutz was left with a bare bone skeleton of workers. And they really asked us to please stay because they really needed us. And I felt needed, and I felt important. I felt I had value to support the existence of the Jewish homeland. So that was the next step. I did go back, and I did pursue the master's degree. And that brought me to Israel a third time in 1974, like just 6 months later, because I entered a program at Jewish Theological Seminary in New York City, and all entering students, rabbinical, cantorial, and graduate degree programs needed to go to Israel for 6 weeks to prepare for the program back in New York. And it was my first exposure to the sacred text. Up until this point, I was just celebrating my Judaism, nationalism, our history, but I never really opened the Bible. And now I remember the teacher came into the room, and he started teaching, and I saw a spark in his eye. He was so passionate to teach us, and it was like sharing. And I remember thinking, I want to be like that. I want my students to see a spark in my eye as I share the text. And that's when I became, not only did I fall in love with Israel, but I fell in love with the sacred text. Came back, pursued, received my master's degree. At the same time, I started to get involved in the very ultra-Orthodox world, because I really felt, alongside pursuing this academic degree, I also wanted to explore my soul. That's not exactly part of a master's degree program in Jewish education. So I thought,
Soul 101.
I made the mistake, as many people do, in equating external dress and ritual observance with being closer to God. So the more that someone looked like they were from another century in Europe 100 years ago, it meant I made that mistake of assuming, well, they must be closer to God because it was more extreme, more of different, unique. And I entered that world with the question of, how do I sense the divine presence? How do I become closer to God? I already believe that there's a creator. I was seeking an immanent, visceral experience, and I thought they would have the answers. They, meaning the ultra-Orthodox communities that I entered, both in New York, and then eventually, after my degree, I did move to Israel. And I met a lot of kind people, nice people, and I met some people that weren't so nice and not kind, because people are people. What I did not, though, what I did not receive, or I did not encounter, was a spiritual sensitivity to allow me to be aware of the divine. It was very, very much a world of emphasizing external ritual observance. So being careful and dedicated to observing even the fine minutiae of the law, that took the front burner. And experiencing an encounter with God seemed to be taking the back burner. And I wanted the opposite. I wasn't interested in becoming ultra-Orthodox. I just thought they would be able to provide the avenue and to do that. And after 15 years, I finally realized I gave it my best. And I realized I'm not receiving what I need. My mind needed to really be creative, because it is creative and it's crisp and creative and searching, and my heart wanted to be more passionate about my experiences, and it wasn't. So I left that part, and then after a few years of out, I started returning to a different, it's a pie and there are different pieces. No one owns the whole pie, and every tradition has a piece of it. So I entered a different way of really exploring and manifesting and expressing my Judaism, where spirituality really became the front burner, and the very detailed observance of the ritual was second to that. Not that it didn't matter, but it became second to the immanent experience with the divine.
So thank you so much. This is to me fascinating. I'm also reflecting on not just the unique individual of your circumstances, but also the nation as a whole. Because you mentioned that in 73, it was existential. You've talked about teachers having a spark. You've talked about even the ultra-Orthodox, which you've, perhaps transitioned through, moved away from a little bit, but nonetheless, their devotion, right, is admirable, and their dedication is noteworthy, right? But so across Israel, I want to ask the question, that was decades ago. Is Israel still today under an existential crisis and an existential threat? And what does that do to infuse the minds and hearts and attitudes of the people in that nation?
That's an excellent question. And I would say, even in 1973, what I perceived as an existential threat was not, because the Israelis believe from 1948, May of 1948, till forever, Israel will never undergo an existential threat. That we have been promised by the prophets that we will come back and usher in a new era. And we're in the very beginnings of that. And I will tell you that in the past 50 years, I have not lived in Israel consistently for 50 years, but I've always been back and forth. And in the past 30 years, consistently living in Israel, I can tell you I've never met an Israeli from the different traditions, more religious, less observant, more secular, this, that really believes we're undergoing an existential threat. We have serious issues, serious problems that need to be solved. And yet, as Golda Meir said, when Nixon asked President Nixon, why are you so sure? You're just a little tiny nation. Why are you so sure that you will be here forever? And she said, we have no other place to go. This is it. This is home. We're home sweet home.
Well, that's the existential threat part of it. Having said that, I also concur with you, based on my read of the Bible, which is, for better or worse, it's all about Israel. So I found that verse that I was referring to earlier. It's Amos 9, verse 9. I'll just read it here. This is the New King James, I think. For surely I will command, and I will sift the house of Israel among all nations. Now, the house of Israel, in ancient Israelitish history and in the Bible, you have the northern kingdom. That's the house of Israel, right? So it's not really the Jews, because the Jews are the southern kingdom of Judah. The house of Israel was in fact taken and were lost. They're the lost 10 tribes I referenced earlier. So this is specifically talking about the house of Israel, but this is fascinating. For I will sift the house of Israel among all nations as grain is sifted in a sieve, yet not the smallest grain shall fall to the ground. And this is the promise of even those lost to history, that God knows who they are. Not to mention, the Jews who have not lost their identity and who have then, under all kinds of different circumstances, you mentioned the diversity earlier, also been sifted through the nations and then returned.
Well, like my family, I feel we've been sifted, but we were never lost. I would like to add, if I could, now that you brought up Amos, who prophesied like 2,800 years ago during the early part of the first temple. The very first words in my book, here it is, right here in the very beginning, is a quote from Amos. In Hebrew, we say Amos.
Yep.
And this really is the overall arch of not only the book, but my exploration and my searching. A time is coming, declares the sovereign God, when I will send a famine upon the land, not a hunger for bread or
Famine
a thirst for water, but for hearing the words of God. And that's what I wanted to hear, the words of God. And with all due respect, and I have a lot of respect and gratitude to the rabbis, I wanted to hear the word of God, not always the word of the rabbis. And a prophet can speak for God. And that prophecy is very true today. I have a spiritual mentoring practice. I'm on tours all the time, all over the world. I teach at a wonderful Institute of Judaic Studies, Pardes, Institute of Jewish Studies in Jerusalem. And more I am seeing, compared to 30 years ago teaching in Jerusalem, I'm seeing today there is this growing hunger and thirst for an imminent direct experience of hearing the word of God. From Amos, chapter 8, verse 11.
Yeah. So I'm thinking now of an earlier prophet, and we'll probably have to have an offline discussion about this. There's some topics I don't want to get into too deeply on the air publicly, but I'll broach it, right? So 3 of my favorite chapters are Numbers chapter 22, 23, and 24. This is the story of Balaam and Balak, right? And now he's a prophet. He's not a non-profit prophet, because he wants the profit of the treasure. Right? And his character, his integrity is compromised, right? In that he finagles a way to go chase that treasure, regardless of the fact that he's told no. And then there's this tale of the donkey. You're familiar with this story, right?
Oh, yes.
So there's the tale of the donkey that sees the angel with the flaming sword and, won't go forward. And Balaam, and I'm probably pronouncing everything wrong, but, it's like beating the donkey.
In Hebrew, it's Bilam.
Bilam is like beating the donkey and the donkey is, like trying to figure out a way out of this mess, and he lurches against this, crushes Bilam's leg against the side of the wall, and now he gets really mad. And then the donkey, speaks to him and says, "What are you doing?" And that's about where it ends in traditional Protestant Bible story sermons, because the minister's point is God spoke through a jackass once, he can work through you. And that's supposed to encourage us, but it misses the whole point of the story, right? That's not really what the story is about. And so the next thing you know, God opens Bilam's eyes and he sees the angel with the flaming sword and realizes the donkey protected him. And then God says, "You know what? Fine, you stubborn jackass, go ahead, but you may only say what I tell you you can say." And then he's being asked to curse Israel, and he goes up on successive mountains and instead pronounces a blessing. Now, I view this whole thing as a prophecy because it says right there, "Come and I will show you what will happen to your people in the latter days." That's part of the whole sequential progression of blessings are curses that are blessings. And in that is the whole pivotal point of whoever curses you shall be cursed. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but the first telegraph message ever produced is pulled from Numbers 23:23. "What hath God wrought?" which went forth on May 24th, 1844. And it's pulled from a verse that essentially says, "From this day it shall be said of Israel, there is no curse or divination against her. What hath God wrought?" And this actually coincides with something called the Edicts of Toleration from the Ottoman Empire, in which the Jews were allowed not just to return, which they already were, but to buy land in Jerusalem. And they were encouraged to do so.
I would like to share that the seed to plant in our inner garden of spiritual awareness that I invite the reader to consider for that section is using the power of speech to enhance the quality of life. Focusing on Bilam's attempt to curse and yet could not. Imagine us, human beings, simple human beings on the planet Earth, if every time we try to curse another human being, a blessing would come forth. What the world would be like.
Yeah, amen. The the evil one, Satan, the devil, in the Bible is, and I don't forget, this is probably in the Gospels, in the more modern writings that are included in the 66 books of the canonized Bible. Satan is called the accuser of the brethren, right? The one who levels blame, the one who casts those accusations, those curses. Yeah. Well, we're going to go to a quick commercial break after all that. And when we come back, we will continue this discussion. I want to learn a little bit more what you're doing now. This is not your first book, correct?
Correct.
Right. So we'll talk a little bit more about your body of work and what you're doing now in the state of Israel. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more with Yiscah Smith. America is wrestling with big questions about freedom, leadership, and what binds us together. No King's rallies may sound like echoes of our founders' ideals, but history reminds us these debates are nothing new. In the biblical period of Judges, Israel was a nation without kings, marked by fierce independence and turmoil. It's called the bloodiest book in the Bible by some. The people sought order and asked for a king. The prophet Samuel cautioned that such a choice would bring unintended consequences, to put it mildly. My own journey, as evidenced in my trilogy and my publishing work and community projects, explores these very questions. How do we balance liberty with responsibility? What can we learn from the past as we seek to shape a better future? Order the trilogy, subscribe to the Substack, and join in a respectful discussion on the future of our nation. Are we walking the path of greater justice, or simply repeating old dilemmas with new names? Let's find out together.
Oh, that's so nice.
The team put that together. I don't know that I've ever aired that on this show before, but it seemed fitting tonight. So you've also written several books. So tell us a little bit about the body of work and who you're working with. I mean, this recent book was published jointly by the Jewish Publication Society and I believe the University of Nebraska Press. So who are you working with? What are you working on with yourself and with other people in that still young nation of Israel, still young and ancient nation of Israel?
So just in full transparency, as we say, I have not published several books. This is my second book. I have published those several articles in different journals, different scholarship journals and I actually love that. I really look forward to that challenge because that's where less is more. So the time it takes to write one article where I have a lot more words allowed than a whole book per chapter, it can take a long time to do the research, but not 2.5 years. So I'm able to constantly put out into the world new ideas, new approaches, also relying on the old tradition. I kind of mix the two, put it in the blender with my own creative, critical thinking, and come up with something more contemporary. So I am writing more articles which have been published. What I'm doing now is an assortment, which is very typical of me. I can't be contained in one anything. I'm post-denominational. I'm not Reform. I'm not conservative. I'm not Orthodox. I'm Israeli and I'm traditional. And I feel pieces of me are in all the different movements, but the bigger part of me is in no movement. And I teach at a wonderful institute in Jerusalem where I meet younger people, the Pardes Institute of Jewish Studies. I also teach online for applied Jewish spirituality. I teach 3 courses a year. Each course is 8 classes on Jewish spirituality. And it's a much older, more life experienced body of students from all over the world because it's on Zoom. So I can be teaching the same text, but when I'm teaching in Jerusalem, in Pardes, with younger people on their way to pursue a PhD or a doctorate, medical school, law school, they lack the life experience that, let's say, my 60-year-old students have, but then they have the youth. Like, I can do anything and I will be immortal, which of course 60, 70-year-old people, we don't have that anymore. So it's just wonderful to teach both of these segments of our wonderful population. I also have a private spiritual mentoring practice, providing mentorship, companionship, where I work with individuals. It's not therapy. I'm a big believer in therapy, but I'm not a therapist. There's a place in Jewish tradition for providing spiritual guidance to individuals. And a lot of my clients were students of mine and wanted to go deeper with me, providing some type of direction or companionship to go into like a deeper, I wish I would have had one really years ago. That probably could have helped me a lot, but it was not meant to be. So those in terms of the Jewish world and what I'm doing in Israel, also going abroad as a public speaker, as a teacher, going to different communities. This year it's more intense than usual because I'm bringing my book with me. And then there are 2 other parts of my life that I just love. My grandchildren. I just love hanging out with my the youngest is about a month old. She was born right at the end of the holiday season, shortly before I left Israel to come on this tour. Actually, the day of Simchat Torah, when we were dancing with the Torah, my youngest grandchild was born. And my oldest is 26 years old. So there's a lot going on in terms of the different age groups and what they're interested in and what they do. And then I just love to be with the family for Shabbat dinners and for the holidays. I also have students over at times. I love to cook. I love to bring people into my home. And I have an amazing garden. And actually, this book, this right here, it's not my garden per se, but it is my garden in that I use the metaphor of becoming an experienced gardener to then employ the metaphoric language in my book, for example, planting seeds of the divine. So when I'm not doing all of that, I'm sleeping or playing with my cat. It's a
I've got to
busy
ask.
life.
I've got to
Busy
ask.
life at 74.
I've got to ask your cat's name. It's embarrassing that I'm asking your cat's name and not your grandchildren's name, but that's too personal.
Rafi.
Rafi. Wonderful. Because we have Coconut and Licorice. Those are two names that my daughter gave to our cats. So let's go back a little bit, because I want to hear this story again about the wall, right? The wall, which when you kissed the wall, it didn't turn into a frog, but it literally spoke to you. And then over time, there was a new section of the wall opened up and dedicated, right?
Yeah, this is absolutely fascinating, and it's such a cause for celebration, and it shows us, it illustrates and demonstrates how Jewish tradition does not have to remain frozen. It can move, and actually there is a vitality, there is a fluidity to Jewish tradition, or we wouldn't be here for 4,000 years. So, for example, after the Six-Day War, when Israel was able to liberate the Jordanian occupation over the old city of Jerusalem, which included the Western Wall, from 1948 to 1967, Jewish people were not allowed to go because Jordan forbade it. So once we were able to liberate the Jordanian occupation of our own capital, the old city of Jerusalem, so the rabbinate, the official religious body in Israel, declared that an official prayer space. It was never for 2,000 years since the destruction of the temple, the Second Temple, it was never an official prayer space. People would go on their own, they would cry, they would smile, they would pray, and it was not a focal point the way it is today. Today, when young men and women are inducted, there's an army celebration. When people get married, the photographer goes to the wall and takes pictures of the bride and groom, and it is an official prayer space, which means there are separate areas. It's separated by gender. There's a men's area and there's a women's area, and there's a wall down the middle. And in terms of official prayer, it would be similar to an Orthodox synagogue. So all over the world, if someone goes into an Orthodox synagogue, there are separate gender spaces for prayer. Even though there's a lot of other activities, like when groups visit, there's huge amount of different groups, older groups, younger groups, Jewish groups, Holy Land Christian tours. Everyone comes to the wall. However, when it comes to official prayer, it's separate. About 10 years ago, and I'm so proud of this initiative, there was a lot of pressure for people who wanted more of an egalitarian setting where men and women would not have to be separate. And we see that in the United States, for example, in the reform movement, in the conservative movement, where there is no separation between men and women pray together. So what the government did, because everything with the rabbinate has to go through the Knesset, because there is not a black and white separation of religion and state at all. When it comes to religion, it's very much a part of the civil law. So things have to be passed in the Knesset. So there was a motion, and it was passed, that a piece of the wall that was not really, people didn't pay much attention to it because it was not developed, that piece, the southern end of where the wall would end, would now be developed so people can come and attend a service there, but it would be egalitarian. So I feel so honored and blessed that I'm part of the tradition, keeping the tradition and yet modernizing it. So now someone who's Orthodox can go to that part of the wall. Someone who wants egalitarian can go to another part of the wall. And those of us who live there know there's another part of the wall that very few tourists ever know about. It's a much smaller section, deep in the Arab quarter, where individuals go to do how it used to be for like thousands of years. So I can go to one of three sections. I can go to the private one, which is called the little wall in Hebrew, the little wall. I can go to the Orthodox section and go to the women's section, or I can go to the egalitarian section, and that really includes everybody. So
Awesome.
I'm very it's very meaningful.
We've gone to prophecies from 2,800 years ago and earlier, and now we're talking about 10 years ago and change.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
There's a Jewish thinker, Abraham Joshua Heschel, who passed away in the 1970s, and he's noted for a lot of like one sentence quips that really go right to the heart and soul. And he said, spiritual living is when your life is one of being radically amazing, not taking anything for granted. So I teach to my students, also to my grandchildren and my children, what at the end of every day, before you go to sleep, what part of the day can you say, wow, that part of my life is radically amazing? And I will tell you, to be in Israel over the decades and children and grandchildren through the ups and downs, it's a life that's radically amazing.
Awesome. Well, here's we're going to now go to look at a few audience comments as we wrap this up today. So here's one that came to mind as I was thinking about the breadth of history. There's nothing like, from Who Knows, there's nothing like placing your hand on those stones and feeling time dissolve.
Yeah. Every time I go back to the wall, the kotel, I feel I'm entering this like cloud, what we call cloud of glory in Hebrew, anana kavod, the cloud of glory, where time dissolves because I'm touching stones that people touched thousands of years ago.
So here's a comment from very early on as we were just getting to know you. I'm not usually drawn to spiritual language, by Higgins, but the way Yiscah frames authenticity feels deeply human.
Oh, that's my prayer.
And here's a question for you from Branstadt25. I'd like to know how you would guide someone whose spiritual awakening is tangled with unresolved trauma.
So how many hours do we have now? All right. So such an important, such a sensitive and deep concern and question. I will just be, what I'd like to provide as a response will not end with a period, but rather with a comma. The first, as difficult as it may seem up here, the heart, every moment of the experience of the heart must be honored. So as much as we don't want to honor pain, we don't want to honor unresolved trauma, we rather not even engage with it. The way to cultivate a spiritual awakening is to use that to then pray to God, pray to the still small voice within to help us. Because quite frankly, in my own journey, when there were moments of trauma, if I didn't turn inwardly or outwardly to the Creator, I don't know how I could have done that alone. And I think that's the setup, if I could use the divine setup, that all the pain and suffering in our lives, I would believe now, cannot be resolved without a spiritual awakening. And that could be the springboard for the spiritual awakening. it was only when I was 50 years old that I finally turned to God in the most real way possible, outside of accustomed ritual, outside of the synagogue, outside of all the formal learning of the sacred text, just on my own. And I cried out or cried in. And I will tell Branstad, 25, and everyone else, it's as if the voice said, I've been waiting for you your whole life to finally realize you can't do this alone. And I have been on a journey, and it's been a healing journey through spiritual awakening that was very tangled with unresolved trauma, to now moving it gently into healing the unresolved trauma, where it no longer defines my life, and yet it's a part of my history that I will always honor. I hope, I hope that's the beginning of an answer.
Thank you so much. Here's one from Bowtime. I love how universal this is. Pretty much anyone from any tradition can relate. That said, how has interfaith conversation shaped your own understanding of the divine? And I'm going to do a little overlay here. I often reflect on how you've got this one nation, which is the Jewish state, right? And it's the only Jewish state on the planet, and it's a tiny little postage stamp you mentioned, of land. And here in America, for example, we have that separation of state and religion, which you don't have, but you've got the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. You've got the Church of the Nativity. You've got the Baha'i World Center. All of these religions have their, major sites of worship in that same little postage stamp. So yeah, it's a Jewish state, but this is a great question. How has interfaith conversation shaped your own understanding of the divine?
So wonderful. And we need to explore that more and more. To back up a minute, it's not so much that Israel is just a Jewish state. It's the Jewish homeland. That was like the French have France, Canadians have Canada, South Africans have South Africa. Whatever the countries are doing, good or bad, each nation, we are more of in the Bible, we're not referred to as a religion. The word religion is not found in the Bible. It's a modern day Hebrew word. What's in the Bible is the nation of Israel, Am Yisrael, or B'nai, the children of Israel. Okay, so that being said, I just love interfaith conversations because I seek to draw out and to pay attention to these mutually shared truths, like from the Dalai Lama or from Gandhi or from leaders of different theologies. It doesn't shock me anymore when I will hear an idea. Well, that's something that I learned in my tradition. And that's the testimony. That's like witnessing the integrity of its truth. So I myself am very not only comfortable, but I really support it. And I would mention that when I proposed my manuscript to Jewish Publication Society and University of Nebraska Press, one of the questions they asked me was, who is my target audience? And I cast a very wide net. It's not just a specific Jewish audience, it's also a Gentile non-Jewish audience. And I've seen now, I spoke to a group at University of San Francisco last week, where out of 75 people, maybe, I was told by the professor, maybe 5 were Jews. Everyone in that room was fascinated by these ideas that I presented from one of the portions, because I do believe in the global message. And I guess just to summarize, I like to think of my fellow Jews as the nuclear family, and then the rest of humanity as the cousins club. Like, we're all related. We're all related. We're all created by the same creator.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to ask a kind of a difficult and challenging question, and then I'll save one or two more from the audience as we run out of time here. But I want to ask you personally on this trip, were you nervous coming to America, given what is obviously it's evident, it's everywhere, a rising tide of anti-Semitism that is, you know, it's debatable. To me, it's not. It's flat out anti-Semitism, but at a minimum, patently on the surface, it's anti-Zionism. It is anti-state of Israel. It is anti those Jews who feel strongly about the national identity of that people and that land. So were you nervous taking this trip because of that rise? And what's your thought on all that?
Not at all. Not at all. Because I believe I'm here as a calling. As I was called to write the book, part of the calling is to share it. And that doesn't mean that I don't recognize that there are maybe pockets within the United States where it's best I don't explore or visit. That being said, this Star of David never goes in. I was in Paris, which is much more actively anti-Semitic, and this stayed out. If I really fear that my life is in jeopardy, if this is out, my Star of David, I won't go there. Having been brought up in the United States, I have dual citizenship, so I am also an American. No, I never. I'm not here as a political activist. I'm here as a spiritual activist, which means what I share in any given room, there will be people more to the left, more to the right. And I did think maybe at University of San Francisco, that would be one place where maybe there'd be some rabble rousing and protest. Nothing. I just put out the positive energy, and I'm still an idealist. I have not, in my older age, resorted to cynicism. I recognize that it's real. I recognize that people have been hurt. And I just go with my mission.
Wonderful. We were talking earlier about sort of the summary, and I actually didn't read any of it, but I'm going to now read this and then ask one more question from the audience. In her youth, this was supposed to be your intro, so it's your outro now, right?
My outro.
In her youth, Yiscah Smith searched for belonging in the familiar rituals of Jewish life, only to discover that faith without honesty leaves the heart untouched. Her journey and exploration from post-war America to Israel's Hasidic world to arrive at a more spiritually sensitive tradition, and along with it, attaining a quieter kind of courage, the courage to listen inward and live truthfully before God. And obviously it's that courage that reminded me that I should have said that, for which I apologize, but it's a fitting coda here. The time was right. It's inspired. That's my story. I'm sticking with it. So one last little question for you. And that is from Super Duper here. Once you started getting into the Bible, what was the most poetic metaphor you used to describe soul growth?
I'd have to say both. There are two. One is water and one is light. When God said, as the creator, let there be light, and there was light, well, we're compelled to answer the question. It's not the light of the physical, like the sun and the moon light, because that was created several days later. So what light was it? It was the light of awareness. It was the inner light we call the organuz, the hidden light. And our Torah is called in Aramaic oraita, which means light. So the Torah is our anchor, it's our bedrock, of which gives us light when we are confused, when we're doubtful, when we feel like we're groping in the dark, which is much of humanity over the past several millennia, that our Torah sheds light. There's even a verse in Psalms, and not Psalms, in Proverbs, that refers to the Torah as ner mitzvah v'torah or, that the Torah is light. Likewise, also water, mayim chaim, living waters. Water flows from a high place to a low place. So the sacred text came into the world from a higher consciousness through prophecies, through very highly, very developed righteous people, came down like a waterfall into the lower realms of the world. So the Jewish tradition employs both of these, the water and the light. And I add my own metaphor, planting seeds, and that in the inner garden. So I think all of those three support soul growth. What a question. That's super duper. Thank you. That's a wonderful, wonderful
Well, and we'll just end with this comment by Linda Lindsay, which is simply a heart. And thank you. Our hearts go out to you, and the courage that it took to take this trip at this time, and the heart that you've shown throughout your entire journey of, a few years and counting now, in exploring and discovering and encountering the divine. And thank you for being here to share that with us today. What last words would you like to leave the audience with today before we go to the sneak peek for next week's show?
I would like to offer a blessing that may all of us, may all of you become aware of the divine presence guiding you along your life paths, so you never feel lonely, that you always feel held by our spiritual parent, our creator.
Amen to that. And I'll conclude with my patented tagline for the show. You are created in the image of God, and God loves his creation. Here's the sneak peek for next week, and we will see you all there on Created in the Image of God. Thank you again, Yiscah, and safe travels home until we meet again.
Thank you. Thank you. Shalom, shalom.
Hey everyone, it's Wade France, and I'm here with another sneak peek for the upcoming episode of Created in the Image of God, which will air on Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Central. I have in the studio with me a person whom I've just met, Mary Demuth, after trying to schedule multiple times and then me not showing up. But finally we got it together. Here she is. And I just learned that she's not just written the book that I was interested in, but over 50 books. And she's dedicated her life really to the idea of restorying. Mary, welcome to the studio.
It is great to be here, and I am so excited to have a good conversation with you about the idea of story and where our stories are going.
Well, we talked a little bit about trauma because that was one of your books, and when you first said that, I almost thought it was a mispronunciation of restoring, but there's probably a kind of restoration that happens through the restoring process. So unpack that for us a little bit. What do you mean when you say restoring?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say, but I've just seen it in my own life where I was living under a different story. And for a long time, my story was I am a victim and I have been harmed. And God has been gracious to me to walk me through a long period of healing. And I have a new story. And now it's been such a joy to be able to empathize and enter into other people's stories and help them experience a re-story as well.
Well, and I've spent my whole life studying the stories of the Bible, and it seems like, they're all like that, right? The whole story of Israel coming out of Egypt and having to leave it all behind and not being slaves, but being conquerors, and not in the Egyptian sense of conquering either, right? So it seems like all the stories of the Bible have that element. How do you apply that in your interactions with people?
Well, I certainly just, I hope that I am really curious. And I think curiosity is a huge trait of love, and being able just to ask a lot of questions and help people at first just articulate their story, because I often tell audiences that an untold story never heals. We need to let it out. And so that's actually the first step, is just to be very curious, to practice holy curiosity, and to ask lots of questions.
Wonderful. So I'm going to throw in a third bonus question here. We don't normally do this in the sneak peek. So do you consider yourself a seeker still?
Yeah, I think I'm constantly a seeker, because I think that's the secret of growth, is when we are seeking. It's a constant act. It's like a dripping faucet. You just keep doing it, keep seeking. And I think the older that we get and the more we grow, the less certain we are, and the more we're capable as mature people to be able to carry nuance. Whereas when we're younger, we tend to think more in black and white, and we don't know how to carry nuance very well.
Wonderful. Well, we'll have a whole hour to unpack that nuance, to get into the complexity, and also understand and discover all of the aspects that Mary has been putting into her more than 50 books. So you're not going to want to miss this coming Tuesday night, 8 p.m. Central Time, for Created in the Image of God with Mary DeMuth. We'll see you there.